Hey there, hi there, hello there. This is Les Bowen with you again for Bowen on the Birds. The people at A2D Radio have, probably against their better judgment, once again allowed me to have this platform, and I enjoy doing it. Today, I have a really special guest, James Palmer from the NFL Network. James is a young reporter, I would say, but to me, just about everybody's young. Um, James is the son of Scott Palmer, a Channel 6 sports guy for a long time, then worked for the Phillies for quite a while. James, of course, grew up in the Philly area, but he's based now in Denver for the NFL Network. So in addition to talking about the Eagles, which he does have some contact with in his role at NFL Network, I also want to talk about, Sean Payton taking over the Broncos. Sean's a guy that Eagles fans have tangled with a few times over the years. And the whole Russ Wilson business is very interesting too. Whether Sean Payton can revive Russ Wilson's career after his worst year ever last season, in his first year with the Broncos. That's against the backdrop, of course, of reports that the Eagles tried very hard to trade for Russ Wilson last offseason before they knew what they really had in Jalen Hurts. And obviously, everybody's glad they didn't do that. Of course, things could have gone better for Russell here than they did in Denver, but nonetheless, Jalen Hurts is a much younger guy, and he's certainly the quarterback they want to see succeed going forward. Other topics today: this business between the 49ers and the Eagles. The 49ers NFC Championship game loss last season has really taken on a life of its own. I'm amazed by it. The background. The 49ers ran out of quarterbacks and got wiped in that game, just got totally shellacked. I can understand them feeling, this was really unfortunate and we didn't really give it, we didn't give a representative effort. But I can't really get behind bringing it up over and over again and acting like, it would be inevitable that they would win if this hadn't happened. I think that's far from apparent, and I think they're probably going a little too far with it there. But it's an interesting topic, and that's not the only fan base that has bones to pick. I think there's some Eagles fans who would like to have seen the Super Bowl played on a less slippery surface, and that comes up every now and then as well, to be fair. But at any rate, it's an interesting thing. I think we do have James ready to go now, and let's bring him up. If my dog will stop barking for a moment. I always get a delivery right about the time I'm doing this podcast, and it's great fun because you can't really tell the dog that I'm doing the podcast. Dog, I'm doing the podcast. Okay. Didn't seem to work. James, how are you?
I'm good, Les. I'm kind of like hunkered down in this like basement bedroom. My house is full of people. Actually, my dog's not barking. He's sleeping behind me. But
oh, there you go. You have a good dog. Yeah.
We got also Hank's the greatest, and we have like all these kids in our house today. So I'm trying to like stay away so you can hear me. How's it going?
Yes. How is Denver today? What's going on out there?
Oh, well, I did a podcast this morning with some guys here in town, and yeah, the whole talk is can Sean Payton fix Russell Wilson? That's all anybody cares about in town, and the sentiment I get at every barbecue is it can't be any worse. Yeah. So they're assuming it'll be better. It'll be better because it really couldn't be any worse.
Well, since you brought that up, let's talk about that a little bit. My view from way far away, Russell Wilson's career I can't believe he just suddenly lost everything. His judgment, his ability to run an offense, his athleticism. I don't believe that he just got old overnight. But there is a certain nagging fear, I think, that because he depends so much on his athleticism and his escapability, his ability to extend plays, that there's a point in your career where that's not what it's all about. How do you see that? You've watched him a lot more than I have recently.
Yeah, so there's a few things at play here, Les. One is there is that group of people that do think, when a quarterback loses it, they lose it and they fall off a cliff.
Mhm.
There is that group of people that do believe it's not a sudden decline; it is a drastic decline, and this has happened with some. But you're right; the fall off from Russ from the level of play to what it was last year was almost kind of unfathomable in complete honesty. There are a number of factors of why things went wrong last year and why they think they'll change. One, you are right. He put on some weight. He thought putting that weight on would allow him to observe some more hits and play till he's 40, which is something he'd like to do. Um, he realized that was slowing him down, taking away one of the things that he was very, very good at, which is extending plays and making plays with his legs. I don't want to say he didn't want to do that, but there was a heavy emphasis last year of I'm a pocket passer.
Yeah.
We're going to build this system around me being like these other brilliant pocket passers we see, like say a Tom Brady even though Aaron uses his legs, I'm
Right.
calling pocket
Less than he
passers
used to.
guys. Yeah, I'm talking about guys that use their mind so eloquently in the pocket. Out of that group, Joe Burrow, that
Mhm.
group. And I think we've realized that's not Russ's game, and maybe
Yeah.
that's okay. You know what I mean? I think there was a lot of people in that coaching staff that were trying to get their voice heard and this voice heard, and there really was just no identity to the offense. And it was difficult. I mean, I've talked to a number of coaches and players that said it was tough. Every week it was something different. We had no idea what our offense was. I think Russ was to blame. I think the coaching staff was to blame. Now he comes in this offseason when I've got a chance to see him firsthand. He's thinner.
Mhm.
He made a conscious effort to lose some of the weight, get back to using his legs a little bit more because Sean Payton wants him to play the hits. I think that's a big part of a lot of the play action, rollout stuff, limiting what he does at the line of scrimmage and really kind of just them running the offense. The other part of this that I don't know if during this entire Russell Wilson, I don't want to call it a saga, but whatever happened over the last year, I think it should show all of us the job that Pete Carroll and company did in Seattle over the last 10 years. Like, I'm not saying like Russ is a bad player. He's a great player. He's probably a borderline Hall of Fame player, possibly. But they knew what they had. They knew what Russ was great at, and they accentuated those aspects of his game. I think they did a great. I think what I realized personally is they did a great job with him over the course of 10 years in terms of making sure he does what he does best. And I think
He
that's
was
what Sean
never a
Payton's
guy
going
that
to
threw
try
the
to do.
ball 50 times a game.
No, and it wasn't. I mean, we saw for flashes during seasons, right? It was always like, let Russ cook. He's going to be in the MVP voting, and a half a year he would really play well in that sense. But what was Pete's mentality always? I mean, it's we run the ball and we play good defense and we play good special teams, and that's always been Pete's model, even when Russ was playing at his highest level. And I think they just kind of knew, in a sense. I mean, I think one thing that stands out at me most as I go on about this is Danny Canales is now the offensive coordinator down
Mhm.
with Tampa. And he was on that staff. And he said something during his introductory press conference in Tampa that I thought was interesting. He was talking about how he's pulled from all these different OCs that have been in Seattle when he was there and these different things. He goes, we learned how to adapt each year. When we got in Geno Smith, we learned that we could open up the playbook in terms of a
Right.
passing game. To me, he was complimenting Geno, but to me, it was we didn't do certain things in the passing game because of Russ, and we could do
You have
those
to be
because of
able to
Geno.
adapt. Yeah.
Exactly. And I don't. And again, all this sounds like it might be like slander to Russ, but it's that staff had a really good gauge and idea of what made him successful and made him one of the better quarterbacks in the league. And I think now we're trying to see if Sean Payton can do that. And the thought in Denver is if Sean Payton can't do it, nobody can, because he's one of the best teachers of football, probably out there on the offensive side of the ball. Maybe one of the best we've ever seen. So that's the idea in Denver is if Sean Payton can't get him right, nobody will. And that's going to put them in a difficult spot because if he's not on the team after 2023, the cap situation is astronomical. It's about $85 million in dead money. They'd probably do a post June 1 and split it. They'd have to. I think the most we've ever seen was the Falcons a year ago when they took on 40.
Right.
And I think it's interesting how early and how much money they paid Jarrett Stidham in free agency to come into Denver. I thought that was maybe hedging our bets. We still want to win
I
games,
think you
but this
kind of
isn't
have
right.
to. I don't think you can. You're in a situation where if Russ doesn't work out, because of the salary cap considerations you mentioned, you can't go back into you can't go find another quarterback in his prime. You're either going to have to draft one who can play right now or have somebody on hand.
And we've seen Sean win with a variety of quarterbacks when Drew has had times where he's been hurt or that, we've seen him win with Teddy Bridgewater. We've seen him, win with those guys. So I find that interesting. I think Sean's mentality to ownership is I'm going to do everything I can to get Russ right. The coaches I've talked to said he had a really, really good offseason. Things looked, what was a word that I kept being told? They were they executed really well. And I think that was something that we didn't see last year. Their execution, and I think having an identity as an offense Sean's established. We'll see. It's interesting because the roster's not terrible.
No, it certainly isn't. Hey, while we're on the Russ question very quickly, the alternate universe quotient here. People talk about, this came up again recently with the report that was a little bit stronger than reports we've had in the past, that insisted that the Eagles were very close to trading for Russ before he went to Denver. How do you feel about that? Do you think that's overstated? It doesn't matter now, obviously, but you got to wonder how everything would be so different if that had happened.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, I was in Denver when the deal happened. I think Philly would have probably had a similar reaction that Denver had. Like, this is a guy we have watched win consistently for 10 years. There's no way you thought this was going to happen. So I think Philly would have been pretty excited to have a quarterback like Russell Wilson.
Well, he had tremendous games against the Eagles. Not as many.
You're right.
He didn't play them as much as he played Denver, but he beat the Eagles single-handedly at least twice that I can remember.
Yeah. I remember being at that game. Remember that game up in Seattle where Carson threw like the most insane ball rolling to his right, and he was almost horizontal to the parallel to the field, and he threw it. I think he had like Aguilar like 50 yards down. It was one of the most amazing throws I've ever seen. Russ won that game, I think, though.
He did. Carson fumbled at the goal line, I think.
Yes.
That was the Super Bowl year. The Eagles went on to win the Super Bowl.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, we were both at that game, and so I do think. Obviously, this stuff always comes up, but like the other part you have to remember, and this, I mean, Howie's going to try to kick the tires on every deal possible. How close did that deal get? How close did it happen? I mean, he's got things in place all the time about things that could potentially happen. So he was looking for a quarterback because just as much as we didn't know this was going to happen with Russ this year, we didn't know Jalen was going to have the year that he ended up having. I think everybody thought he'd improve again. I don't think anybody with a straight face will tell you he's going to be runner-up to the MVP and have one of the best Super Bowl quarterback performances we've ever seen.
There are people now in Philly who insist they knew all along, but I'll tell you, coming off that loss to Tampa Bay in the playoffs after the 2021 season, I had a great respect for the guy's personality, temperament, leadership, work ethic, but I was like, can he really be a number one for a Super Bowl team? There were so many things he did poorly in that game, and it was a playoff game. I was like, I'll be surprised if they're not looking for a quarterback again next year. Well, hey, Hank's moving. Yeah,
there's Hank. Yeah, Hank, he's laying down now. Yeah. I mean,
but obviously, it just went. It went way beyond. His performance in the Super Bowl, there was that fumble, for the touchdown, which was incredibly unfortunate. But I thought he was the best player on the field. In the second half, he just took the team on his back. And I'm, very, like everybody else, I think, very bullish on Jalen Hurts now. But I did not know a year ago that this was going to happen. And I'll be glad to say that.
Yeah, nobody did. I was at his pro day. I remember doing his pro day at Oklahoma. And I was there, and just trying to ask people in the Oklahoma program just about him and things like that. And it wasn't like nobody wanted to talk about like him as a thrower, him as a runner. Like they wanted to talk about like the guy just wins. Like he has a leadership and a winning mentality, and that was what my. If you would have asked me before this past season and like the game you're talking about right after that game in Tampa, I'd have been like, this is a guy that I do think can win you games in the NFL. Is he going to get you to the Super Bowl and be a franchise quarterback and at one point for a very short period of time, the highest paid quarterback in football. Like, no, I don't know if I see that. And then fast forward, I hosted the NFL 101 Awards in Kansas City, which is it's one of the oldest, NFL put on by the Hunt family forever ago. And Jalen won the NFC Player of the Year, and so he was there in Kansas City accepting his award. And Andy Reid won Coach of the Year. It was kind of nice for all the people in Kansas City. They had half the awards at this thing. Yeah. I think Chris Jones won Defensive Player of the Year. And so anyway, Andy on stage with me in front of 1,000 people just goes out of his way to point at Jalen and just say to him in front of the entire crowd, he's like, "I got to stop you for a second, James. One of the best performances I've ever seen."
Yeah.
One of the best performances I've ever seen. And to come from a Hall of Fame coach like that, now I get it's easy to say it when you won. But also Andy's in Kansas City and, where he's the head coach and they just beat Jalen and he stopped the entire show to make sure Jalen got his due. It was really, really a neat moment. And when Jalen took the stage for our interview and he won, he brought Brian Johnson as his presenter. His new OC now, but known him forever. He got a standing ovation. He got a larger ovation than Mahomes did, larger ovation than Chris Jones did. It went on for forever. And it was because of the respect that he gained from the people in Kansas City for what he did in the Super Bowl.
That is very good to hear.
Yeah.
James, we're coming up on a very short commercial break here. We'll be right back with you on the other side. And I hope Hank has a few things he can tell us.
For sure.
Hey, Birds fans, the NFL schedule has arrived and Philly Sports Trips has all the details now. Visit the site phillysportstrips.com. This is sure to be an epic season. Be sure to go there now to make sure that you don't get shut out. Join us in Tampa, LA, Seattle, or when we get revenge in Kansas City. Don't want to fly? No problem. Gather up your crew and hop aboard one of our signature boisterous bus trips to DC or New York. Sign up now and make sure to mention A2D. Don't miss out on the best Philly fan experience anywhere. Philly Sports Trip customers always stay at the best hotels and meet NFL legends. Book today.
All righty, we are back, and there's James Palmer. Hey, James, while you're with us, I wanted to delve into your past a little bit because it's very interesting, and it's one of the reasons we have you on the show is you're from Philly.
Yep.
And your dad is well known to people who are watching this. Scott Palmer, longtime distinguished sports anchor at Channel 6 and then worked for the Phillies for quite a while. What's Scotty doing now, by the way?
He is now a Phillies ambassador.
All right.
So he is kind of I think he's, 74 now? So sorry, Scooter, to throw your age out there, but he is.
He doesn't look it, unlike me.
No, he looks great. He still wants to be around the club and he still wants to be around the ballpark. He just loves it. But he's kind of taking a step back a little bit, and so he's doing he's getting a chance to do a lot of the things that he loves, which is charity work, which is something he's done forever in Philadelphia with a number of charity boards he's on and things he's a part of. He's getting a chance to really dive into that a little bit more, which I think he really, really likes. I know he loves getting a chance to go to Children's Hospital and shop and things like that. And with him and the Fanatic just making their rounds around town, he loves. And then him and Greg Luzinski run these fan trips for huge contingents of fans going to these roads. They just did one in Chicago where they were at this unbelievable new hotel I hadn't seen in Wrigleyville, right across the street from Wrigley.
Really?
And they had a boatload of fans and they stayed right there and went on, architecture boat tours all over Chicago and stuff. So him and Bull just kind of run these fan trips all over the place. He's crossing his fingers. Hopefully they can run one to London this next year.
Oh, yeah.
When Philly jumps across the pond. I know he'd love to be able to do that. So he's still pretty active with the club and stuff, just kind of has changed his role of late a little bit. He's hoping that we have a strong second half, myself included, over there at CBP.
Now, does he get out to see you very much? Because I told you I have a son in Denver, and I love going out there. I just, he could not be in a more interesting place for me. We've been hiking Rocky Mountain State Park.
Love it.
To tell you the truth, my wife isn't great on flying 3 hours, but I would come out once a month if she let me. You know?
I think that's kind of the case. My mom's not a lover of flying, but yeah, it's he does love coming out. They love national parks. They love the mountains. That was long before I moved here. I mean, we used to vacation out here when I was a kid. Yeah, and so my mom is a huge national park person. So they love coming and visiting me, and then they'll dip out and head up to Estes Park or Rocky Mountain National Park, or see their friends that their best friends they grew up with in Chicago. And introduce them actually live up in Casper, so they jump up to Wyoming and stuff. So they do love coming out.
Well, that's cool. So you growing up, Scott Palmer is your dad. Did you go to a lot of stuff with him? I know my kids never did, because I was not in a role where they could accompany me. They went to like training camp a few times and some Flyers practices and stuff like that. But they're not like sitting beside you at the games or anything like that. Were you with your dad a lot? Do you have a lot of memories of famous sports figures in Philly and so forth?
Yeah, I do, Les, actually. Like, my dad was pretty good at trying to tag me along once in a while. You know what I mean? I got old Polaroids of, like, I think I'm like on Jaws' shoulders. It's me, him, and Herm Edwards up in Lehigh, and I'm like 5 years old and stuff. And so he did try to get me around, once in a while to some things. And my favorite thing, honestly, was going down to City Line and getting into Channel 6's studio. Like, I loved sitting in that room that was my dad, Gary Papa, and Jack Brayboy and all those guys, Phil Andrews. Just, they had their own room. Thought it was so cool that they had the sports equipment in their room. Now, Jim Gardner doesn't have anything of that near his desk, but they had like a putting thing in there and stuff. And I would log games for my dad. Like, if there was nobody there, and I'm like in 8th grade, 9th grade, and he'd be like, watch this Sixers game. We're watching this also, like, chart when like Barkley has a ridiculous play or whatever, and time code them so they can throw them into the highlights. So like, I loved just being around television and being around sports television and like watching them put those shows together and just hanging out in his office. Like, that was to me like the coolest thing, or that was to me almost cooler than being like at the stadium. Just because I love the way TV is made and watching everybody going around, getting ready for the 5 o'clock news and the 6 o'clock news. It was cool. And so he did take me like around the park, and I got to meet some people, usually at like charity events. Peter Zezel was my favorite player when I was a kid.
Yeah, great guy.
Great guy. And so like, I remember going like Flyers softball games and things like that. My dad milking cows at the vet. Yeah, those type of things.
Oh my. So now, as I understand it, I read a bio of your dad that mentioned you. And at that time, this was quite a while ago, I guess when he first went to work for the Phillies, and you were looking at becoming a teacher and coach, according to your dad's bio. And I know you had like a double major at Ohio State, right?
Yeah, I wanted to teach. I did. My mom's a teacher. My sister's a teacher in Philadelphia. And I thought the idea of being a teacher and a coach was the greatest thing in the world. I mean, I loved sports, played everything in high school, went to Ohio State hoping to, further my baseball career. The arm didn't really love that. And so I thought the idea of teaching and coaching was just the greatest thing in the world. And I liked that Ohio State had a 5-year program with the master's built into it. Because I know in Pennsylvania, you got to keep getting that education, man, as a teacher. And so I was like, if I knock this out now, that'd be great. And I ended up like having a minor in journalism, and the Blue Jackets had just started in Columbus.
Oh yeah.
And Zach Hill helped me out with getting the internship with the PR department. And I was like, they were brand new, and they're like, what do you want to do? I was like, I can write, I can do anything. They're like, all right, get down to the locker room and interview, Rick Nash. Well, all right. And I started asking him questions, and I was like, oh boy, I do think this is what I want to do. And I started writing for the website and doing all those things around and I just started putting in more hours than my internship was supposed to be, just to be around, the team. And I love hockey. Like, I'm a big hockey guy. So the Flyers have really pained me of late, but it bit me, like the whole journalism thing, telling stories. And then I started working for the arena football team there as well, the Columbus Destroyers. Quarterback Matt Nagy there when I was covering the Destroyers. And so I was like, yeah, this journalism thing is definitely, being around sports, telling sports stories is it. I finished the education degree. I got certified. I finished my student teaching. But yeah, I was moved out to, my first job was covering the Mountain West Conference on a startup network by Comcast. And so I moved out there, just started covering, college football and baseball.
So was your dad glad that this happened, or was he apprehensive? Because I know both of my kids sort of toyed with the idea, and I was doing it from a newspaper perspective, and our business has been in the toilet for 20 years. People get laid off every, and I was like, no, you're not doing that. Nope.
Yeah.
I discouraged it very actively. But how was your dad about sports?
He was kind of like, he knew that I had a big passion for, like, we used to make a lot of movies, and he taught me how to edit. I knew how to edit tape to tape when I was in high school. So I was in love with the idea of making and producing and being creative. And obviously the sports thing was still there because I played so many sports and stuff, and we're a big sports family and stuff. But he didn't really push it too hard. I more or less pushed against it because I'm sitting at the free throw line in high school, and they're humming the Action News theme song in the crowd, and I'm like, oh God, this is terrible. I gotta get out of here.
Yeah.
And everybody's gonna be on TV like your dad, and I was like, no. Now I am, and now we have just these unbelievable conversations. Him and I, he gets things that no other father would get unless they were in the business. He'll be like, I could tell they were talking to you in your ear while you were talking there. The mix minus was off, wasn't it? Blah, blah, blah. And tell me all these things. And we can have these great conversations about it. But I wasn't, he didn't push it at all. We knew that everybody in the house knew I loved to be creative. And so and loved telling stories. And so that was kind of the thing that he didn't know, but he didn't really push it. I just kind of pushed against it until, the bug bit me, and we're all kind of curious why it bit us, right, Les? Like, why did we get into this whole deal? But I guess it's paid off because, listen, I knew wholeheartedly that you're not home on holidays. You work every weekend, and you stop working when the story's over. And at a young age, and I kind of want to get this out there, like a lot of kids that were starting as production assistants with me, didn't get that. And a lot of kids today don't get that. Like, you work until the story's over. If a team's hot, you're working around the clock until it's over or whatever it is. I was sent to Houston when Hurricane Harvey hit, and they were like, just follow the Texans. I was like, when do I come home? They're like, we didn't book you a return flight.
Yeah.
Like, we'll see when the story's over.
Yeah.
And I stayed in Houston for like 3 weeks. We're just following JJ Watt on this unbelievable, humanitarian campaign that he did during Hurricane Harvey, and just went with him everywhere. You just work it until the job's over. I think knowing that made life a little bit easier for my wife and my family, because she was well aware, because I knew the life before I really got super into it.
When I was covering the Flyers, they were at the draft in Montreal, and they had the whole Eric Lindros thing where they thought they had traded for Eric Lindros, but the dispute with the Rangers. So we all had to stay. The league was going to have these hearings, and I actually bought a shirt in the hotel lobby shop, and it was not a good shirt.
No,
it was not my favorite shirt, but I had to have a shirt because I was staying. I wasn't going home.
I've done it.
Yeah, that's exactly.
I've been in an airport. Thinking I'm flying somewhere, and then hey, we booked you a ticket. You're now going here, and I change terminals and go do the other story somewhere else. But there is something, and I'm curious if you have had this, like, there is an energy to that, though.
Oh God, yes.
You get your adrenaline gets going. You're get going. Yeah, you're excited. I want to cover the biggest story. Like, I mean, I remember that. I think one of the instances that happened, I was flying somewhere, and they're like, "Hey, in practice, Deshaun Watson just tore his ACL in Houston. You got to get there." And I think I was actually in Philly. I went from Philly to Houston, back to Philly, or for some reason, and you get energized. Like, you're like, "Oh, this is the big story. Like, let's see what we can get while covering this, and how's the best way we can tell it." And to me, it's always, how can I provide something that nobody else has provided, and a story or an angle that nobody else has. I mean, that's the challenge that we have now with players being able to put out their own content, Teams are getting better and better at the content that they produce themselves.
Yeah.
And those are obviously strong advantages for what we're going against because of the access and of the story. But like every Sunday on game day morning on NFL Network before the games kick off and we're on for 6 hours, I want to try to tell stories that nobody else is told. And that still excites me even
Absolutely.
now for every
that's
Sunday.
The thing to want to do too. There's too much hot takery and stuff like that in the business now. You have the right perspective. There's no doubt about it.
Oh, thank you, Les.
We've got to go for one more commercial break here, if you'll bear with me, and we'll be right back very quickly again. And if Hank is ready to weigh in, we'll do that.
He's asleep. He's a huge.
Hey, Birds fans, the NFL schedule has arrived and Philly Sports Trips has all the details now. Visit the site phillysportstrips.com. This is sure to be an epic season. Be sure to go there now to make sure that you don't get shut out. Join us in Tampa, LA, Seattle, or when we get revenge in Kansas City. Don't want to fly? No problem. Gather up your crew and hop aboard one of our signature boisterous bus trips to DC or New York. Sign up now and make sure to mention A2D. Don't miss out on the best Philly fan experience anywhere. Philly Sports Trip customers always stay at the best hotels and meet NFL legends. Book today.
And we're back with James Palmer, who is being very generous with his time out there in Denver today. James, I want to talk about the Eagles a little bit. Since it is an Eagles podcast, I guess I'm obligated to do that at some point. So how do you think the league sees the Eagles right now, coming off that Super Bowl? I know, just looking at the history of teams, especially teams that have lost the Super Bowl, it's almost impossible to get back. I mean, although there's a great deal of optimism about the team here in Philly, I think that's a fact. You saw it with the Bengals last season. Great team, almost won the Super Bowl 2 years ago. Didn't quite get back. Almost got back. Didn't get back. Yeah. A lot of changes here on defense, new coordinators. How do you think the league sees the Eagles?
Well, I think, Les, the perception around the league is a few things right now. One, the AFC with the quarterbacks that they have, who knows who's going to come out of that outside of everybody still picking the Chiefs, but there's so much other talent.
The Chiefs like don't get back every year. Yeah.
Exactly. And what you mentioned with Cincinnati, they're not if Patrick Mahomes on the scramble is not pushed from the back and the extra 15 yards are added and it becomes a 45-yard field goal, who knows what happens in the AFC Championship game. But Cincinnati's right there again. And my point is the teams I'm bringing up, repeating and coming back and always be in the mix, at least in the championship games, are the teams with a quarterback play that is not common around the NFL. Everybody is curious if Jalen Hurts is going to replicate what he was able to do this past year. I would say the more people I talk to, they'll say he's going to take a step forward as opposed to back. And it's for a few reasons. One, if you look at all of his, if you talk about, if you're a stats person, stats have gone up in every single category, every single year. Passer rating's gone up each and every year. Interceptions down, touchdowns up, yards up, everything. The other part is that's because of, like, a lot of people say, his work ethic, right? Football IQ and what he does. But I think to me, like, I had a position coach who's a friend of mine who was one of his off-season assignments. A lot of assistant coaches have these projects that head coaches put them through, and one of his was to study the Eagles offense in depth, every single play, how they operate, whatever, and report back to the head coach. And he told me during his evaluation, it was really this: like, the Eagles are so good on offense, because they're just better than you are as a defense. They're just more talented across the board. And I don't think that's really changed, right? I mean, you exchange really. The
right
main
guard.
thing is Miles, right guard, and that's kind of up in the air a little bit, but the rest of the line is so good. And then Miles Sanders is out, and you have DeAndre Swift and Rashad Penny.
Unless there's tremendous injuries there, I think that's a stronger running back room actually than they had last season.
I think so too. Yeah, and it's a team that definitely has had
rushing for 1,200 yards, but
it's definitely a backfield that has had injury past too. Like, Swift has had injuries. We know how good Penny is, but man, injuries have. I think he's missed like 40 of his last 55 games or something like that, or 60 games. And so That's number one of why they think the Eagles' offense is so good. So that's not changing. Two, he told me it's Jalen Hurts. Like, a defense is always on their heels because you have to respect him keeping it and running the zone read option, even if it's not a zone read run play. Teams are just kind of like they're not coming downhill all the time because he can burn you in that sense. It's just an advantage for the entire offense because of the way it's designed and the way Jalen plays. So that doesn't change either because they've insisted to all of us that he's still going to run the football. He's still going to play the way he's playing even after the contract. The third one that I was told was Shane Steichen's play calling and how it's not a complicated offense, but when he calls plays, where he calls plays, and how he calls plays is a big part of why this offense is successful. So that's one of the three that's going to change. Yes. And now Brian Johnson comes in as the play caller. I think that's a little bit of a question mark, but how often do you come in and you're a quarterback with a new play caller and you've known him since you were like 5 years old? That's not but that doesn't mean.
And he was there last year and saw how Steichen was doing it.
Exactly.
It's not like he's going to say, I'm going to do things very differently than Shane Steichen did.
Exactly. And it will be done exactly the same, right? Nick has made it clear. It is this offense. This offense isn't changing. Maybe some wrinkles will be added and whatnot, but Brian's going to be calling Shane's and Nick's offense that they've created. Now, I think there is something to play calling. Like, there is a feel. There were times where, if you thought, like, you heard the stories, like there are times where Shane would be in the zone. He wouldn't even be looking at the call sheet, and he'd just be this and this and this. Does Brian have that? We don't know yet. But there's everything I mentioned. There's a lot of continuity to say that they should be the same, and Jalen's only going to be better. To me, what stands out is he was arguably the best pocket passer in football last year. Yeah. Who would have thought that was going to happen? Like, I mean, nobody would have thought that was going to happen. So the other part that I think there's the play calling change, and the part that you mentioned, Les, they were very lucky in terms of health. I mean, they lost Goddard for a stretch, and they lost C.J. Gardner-Johnson for a stretch. But as a whole, like, pretty good injury luck to get to the big dance. And that's one thing that could hold them back. But I think the perception is it's them and the Niners in the NFC. And that's pretty much what everybody's thinking.
Well, you bring up the Niners, and that's another subject. I don't know if you've been following this very much. It's a big deal on talk radio and stuff here in Philly, especially since we're 2 weeks out from training camp and everything else has been talked into the ground. This whole thing with the Niners players, several times in the offseason, there's been a lot of, like, if we just had a quarterback, we would have beaten those guys, and people here don't take well to that. Not that I think the game would have been much, much more competitive, obviously, had they not lost all their quarterbacks. But the idea that they weren't thoroughly beaten, or that, I think more than that, people object to, so why didn't you have quarterbacks? Because two of them got hurt by the Eagles pass rushers. Well, was that just, did anvils drop on them from the sky, or did your offensive line not hold up? I mean, I think people here get a little salty about that. And we had a thing where Deebo Samuel walked off an interview.
Oh, Zach Gelb's show. Yeah.
Yes. So that's been talked about. What do you make of that? To me, it's weird that everybody's talking about the Eagles and the 49ers. They play in December, and, we'll get this settled then and blah, 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 which of course won't settle anything from last year. Last year is over. But the Eagles are playing the Chiefs this year. They're playing the team that beat them in the Super Bowl. Nobody's talking about that. But the 49ers, darn those 49ers. Yeah.
Well,
how do you see that?
Well, like, if anybody starts talking in a rivalry, it's going to bolster it up, right? And that's always what's going to get fans' blood going. I mean, I was at the other game, the AFC Championship game, that and I was thinking, like, I'm at the wrong game. The better game is going to be in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And I was about to watch Burrow and Mahomes, and I was like, I think in terms of complete teams on both sides of the ball, I think that was probably the better game. I think it was the game that, if you really, like, deep football fans would tell you, that was the game of the weekend they were looking forward to. Even though Burrow versus Mahomes, I think, is the new Brady Manning. Like, I think that is the Brady Manning. Everybody's saying it was going to be Mahomes, Josh Allen. I think it's Mahomes and Burrow is the new Brady Manning. The next one we get, they're both incredible players. But I don't really. It really seemed, unless something's going on behind the scenes that a lot of us don't know, a lot of the talk from the 49ers side seems very unprovoked. Like a lot of it started at the Super Bowl week. I think that's where Debo really said it first. And I think even who's their kicker?
Oh yeah. I don't know, but yeah.
Robbie Gould. Yeah. And he went off. Like there's no way they got a chance against the Chiefs with Jalen Hurts as their quarterback. Like it seemed really weird. I hate to use the term, but it just seems like they're really butthurt about what happened.
Yeah.
And I know growing up in Philly and all of my boys still being there, my family's still being there, like all this talking is just irritating Philly people because they beat you. And they beat you because not like there was like Brock Purdy, made a misstep in a walkthrough on Thursday and sprained his MCL and couldn't play in the game. Like it's because football happened. Like they got to him with their pass rush, which was the best pass rush in all of football.
I would say that even though it should have been a very, very close competitive game, that edge was a significant edge. I know Trent Williams and so on and so forth, but in several spots on that line, I think the Eagles had an advantage with their pass rush. And, I don't think the final result, I think the score would have been quite different, but I don't know if the final result would have been any different. And I think it's really over the top to, proclaim that it definitely would have been.
Yeah, and the interesting part is, and no slight to Brock Purdy, I covered a couple of the games down the stretch. I mean, his confidence, the way he runs that offense, the way guys so quickly that I talked to, like Kyle Juszczyk and George Kittle and stuff, that I would talk to about what they thought about Brock Purdy and what he was doing, and it was the play was real, like it was legit down this, like when they're heading into this game and through the postseason. But it's not like they lost Patrick Mahomes and then they had to go out there and play. It wasn't, you know what I mean? It wasn't like they lost the MVP at quarterback and then had to go out there and play without him. It was still a guy that there's still a lot of question marks about, that was playing great to start his NFL career. But it's kind of interesting, I think, mainly because the Niners know how good of a roster they had. Like it really was a fantastic roster.
Oh yeah, great defense. Yeah,
it's great defense. The skill players are out of this world. Like, it's so I get the frustration, but I don't get like all this talk still about it. Like, and maybe they brought it along themselves a little bit because I listened to the interview and like Debo hangs up. He starts getting frustrated when Zach's asking him about Purdy and Trey Lance. And I'm like, what are you upset about that? Like, it wasn't even the Philly fans that like really got him starting to get angry. So I think there's probably just a lot of, and Kyle Shanahan knows this. You only get a certain number of chances to get there.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's true.
I think Philly is probably having that exact same thought, honestly. Like, that was the best roster in football.
Yeah.
The Eagles had, in my opinion, top to bottom, and they didn't win the Super Bowl.
Right.
So I know there's probably a lot in Philadelphia going like, God, like you don't get that many chances to get there.
That was my takeaway from the Super Bowl. Like the day after, having been through this before with the Flyers, with the Eagles in the McNabb years, you got there, you had the better team, and somehow you didn't win. And that's that's a big mountain to climb.
And so I think the Niners had that same feeling, honestly.
Yes.
But they just didn't get. I mean, theirs happened in a little bit different fashion. It's not like the Eagles lost Jalen Hurts, but I think it's probably a little bit the same thing. But it just seems very unbecoming, to be entirely honest, and unnecessary. It makes me wish the game was happening in the beginning of the season. Like I wish it was in the first 4 weeks.
By December, there's going to be all kinds of other storylines.
A million other storylines. The only
heading into training camp kind of things.
Exactly. The only credence I take out of that list is like with it happening that late, like there's a good chance we're going to see the game happen again in a few weeks. So like I do kind of like that because the teams will be relatively similar and we can get a gauge on what maybe a playoff match will be.
Rubber match. Yes.
Rubber match. Exactly. It won't be one of those where it's like, well, that was beginning of the season. We don't know what they're like now. Well, the games are closer. We'll know. So, but I don't really get it. I haven't seen kickers talk a lot of trash in an off season in my life.
Good point. Well, we've got one last commercial break. I swear to God, this is the last one. Okay. And we'll belabor. We'll belabor our point with you and the Eagles just a little bit farther, and then we'll let you get back to Hank and your family.
Yeah.
Hey, Birds fans, the NFL schedule has arrived and Philly Sports Trips has all the details now. Visit the site phillysportstrips.com. This is sure to be an epic season. Be sure to go there now to make sure that you don't get shut out. Join us in Tampa, LA, Seattle, or when we get revenge in Kansas City. Don't want to fly? No problem. Gather up your crew and hop aboard one of our signature boisterous bus trips to DC or New York. Sign up now and make sure to mention A2D. Don't miss out on the best Philly fan experience anywhere. Philly Sports Trip customers always stay at the best hotels and meet NFL legends. Book today.
And we're back coming down the home stretch of Bowen on the Birds with the very patient James Palmer pulled up there in his basement in Denver.
Yeah.
James, every week I have this question that's supposed to be a big deal on the show, and I've kind of pushed it into the last segment here because we had so many other wonderful things to talk about.
Yeah.
My agree or disagree this week was I think Jordan Davis really has to bust out this year for the Eagles to be as good as they were last year defensively. I know everyone expects he'll play a lot more and he'll be effective, but looking at what's happened, I think Javon Hargrave was the biggest loss they suffered.
Mm-hmm.
I know Gardner Johnson had the interceptions. They all came in a very short span of time. I'm not sure
that the league lead with like the number.
Yeah, he did. Some of them bounced into his hands and stuff. And I'm not deprecating the guy. He was a fine player. I wish he was still here, but it's not like he was, building his Hall of Fame credentials here last season or anything. I think Javon Hargrave with his 11 sacks from the defensive tackle position is a huge loss. And I want to see Jordan Davis. I know they drafted Jalen Carter. I know they have Milt Williams, and I saw a thing somebody wrote about, identifying Milton Williams as the breakout guy, that people don't know about. I don't know. He's been around a couple years now. He's okay. I think Jordan Davis, he was drafted to be a Fletcher Cox kind of guy. And I think that's what he needs to be this year to keep that defense, where it needs to be. How do you see that?
Oh, I agree 100% because of what I've been told by guys like Javon Hargrave and Fletcher Cox, who I've had conversations with about Jordan. And they're just like, I don't think he knows how good he can be.
Yeah.
I don't think he even understands how dominant of a player he could be. I remember Javon telling me this late in the year. I think we were talking over the phone leading into the Bears game and that I was covering. And he was like, he does things in practice that I don't even know if he realizes how unbelievable they are, how freakish they are, to be able to move these grown men the way he does it. It's almost like he doesn't understand how great he can be. I do think having those vets around him throughout the year probably started to put him on that path of really understanding, hopefully, of what it takes, A, and B, that you are capable of doing this at the NFL level. I think Hargrave's interior pass rush and Fletch still playing at a high level last year, like that's a big reason why a lot of the stuff happened on the outside. Like, I don't know if guys like Brandon Graham have the season that we were not expecting if they weren't getting the interior pressure that they were getting. And so interior pass rush pressure has become so much more important in the NFL over the last several years. It used to be edge guys who got paid again today, right? Quentin Williams goes in and gets paid. Like the dollars for interior pass rushers are going up. Why? Because it's becoming more important. And with the way these quarterbacks move and roll out and can drop forever and still throw the football, getting to them quickly in the shortest distance, a straight line right in front of them, is extremely important. And he can stop the run and he can get after the passer. He needs to play more and he needs to be an impactful player up front because, as I mentioned, Fletch is another year older. There's some other question marks up there. We know Hargraves isn't coming back. We know they're pretty good on the outside. I think Nolan Smith will have some really kind of like wow. I don't know if they'll be like consistent all the time, but I think there'll be moments where we're like, oh, well, look at the speed and the bend on the side there, and same with Reddick is like that. And you need to have consistent interior play. It's you look at the teams that are great, and the two we mentioned. This just jumped into my head, Les. The two we mentioned on the other side of the conference. How dominant is Chris Jones? And he doesn't get enough credit. DJ Reader in Cincinnati. Like, those are dominant interior players. And you need to have one. And I think our expectations are high because of the freakish ability. I mean, the
size,
the ability is to do what he does in terms of how he moves at his size is not normal, and it's not even normal for the NFL.
Yeah,
So
his rookie year, everything was great because the Eagles got to the Super Bowl, and they ranked really high in almost every defensive stat. I was kind of disappointed that he didn't play more. I mean, his high was 29 snaps, and that was early in the season. I just don't think we got enough of a read. He got injured. He missed 4 weeks. And when he came back, he really didn't have, he didn't really have much of an impact at all when he came back. And his snap total wasn't what it had been earlier.
No.
I would like to be a little more sure that he's going to make that big step forward, not just to play more snaps and be good, but to be that guy. Because frankly, I think Fletch is kind of at the very end here. I think
he exceeded all of our expectations last year, right, Les? Don't you think?
Right. But when you think about the 2012 draft and how long ago that was, and the beating he's taken, and, it's just been, I don't think they can depend on him to be the anchor, this year. Yeah. And Jalen Carter's a rookie, and you don't rely on rookies if you're a really good team, unless they're the greatest player ever or something, I do think Jordan Davis is a huge key for this team.
I have one more.
Oh, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, I just think he is too, and I don't think it could be over. It might be overshadowed a little bit with Jalen Carter coming and Nolan Smith coming. You have 2 first-round picks on that defensive line. I do think it's like overshadowed a little bit of like, no, keep your eye on Jordan Davis on what he does in year 2, because a lot of times that first year, hate to say it, even immature guys or things like that, like you learn about the NFL and then you become a player in year 2. And maybe that's the case.
I agree. So you're mentioning 3 guys there that are from Georgia, and that's my last topic for today. You spent some time down there in the Atlanta area, I believe, and early in your career. This has been an interesting Eagles evolution for Howie Roseman over the last several years. There was a time we were all writing stories and talking about how he loved the Pac-12. That worked out well at times and not well at times. You had your Zach Ertzes, you had your Sidney Joneses, you had your Donnell Pumphreys, you had, Andre Dillard, suddenly that is switched, and he is all about Georgia and Alabama. And I know fans like that because they see those players on Saturdays every week, and they know they're, players who were dominant players in college and are very well regarded. And so far, it seems to be working very, very well. But what do you think of this switch in Howie's mindset? And is it I guess the SEC really is where it's at in terms of talent right now. I mean, things have changed so much with the NIL and all that stuff. It just, I guess you have to go that way if you're looking for talent.
Don't sleep on my Buckeyes, Les. I mean, we're wide receiver you now. Look at the wide receivers coming out of Ohio State, and Philadelphia's own Marvin Harrison Jr. probably going to be a top 5 guy this.
He certainly will be.
He is unbelievable. I heard Chris Olave talking about him the other day. He was like, he's the best wide receiver I've ever seen. He's like, and his work ethic is even better than he is talented, which is crazy. Great kid though. And so I think, and Howie talked about this a lot in the offseason. I was at a lot of these press conferences because I was with him, Philly in the draft and things like that. And you do kind of like some of these programs once you get a really good feel for them. And it is called lying season for a reason in the off season. And it's not just NFL teams that are lying to each other about who they're interested in and to everyone. Teams are trying to sell their players. Like college coaches are trying to sell their players. The higher they get drafted, the more they can tell. What is college football? College football is a recruiting-based system. How much talent can you acquire? And that's the better your team will be. And the higher your players are drafted, better chance you are of telling guys you're going to get drafted there too.
Yes.
But I think what happens is if you can find programs that are going to shoot you straight. And I think that's when you sometimes see organizations spend time with with a college program because they're getting really good intel, and they're getting solid intel that they believe and trust.
That's a good point.
It's why there's always been such a connection between Nick Saban and the New England Patriots because of his relationship with Bill Belichick. I've been at that pro day so many times where Nick is talking to everybody, and then Bill walks in and two are gone. They're up in his office alone, and he is shooting Bill straight about certain players and about what he thinks about his guys. So I think, and this is just a guess with Howie in Georgia. This isn't like I've been told anything. I think they're getting good information, and I think that because you made a big risk going and getting Jalen Carter, so you had to have something that sold you on going and getting him. But at the same time, Howie had said this repeatedly, and I do believe there's part of it, and I've heard it about a number of NFL people. When you get Alabama guys, they're just ready. They're just they love football, they're prepared, and they're smart. And
they practice
come to
against great players every day,
Every day, yeah. And if you don't love football, I remember Christian Harris tell me this, the linebacker who I think should have a really good sophomore year in Houston. At the pro day when I was down there, and I remember I think Devontae told me this when I interviewed him. Like, if you don't love football, you're just not going to last here. Like, you're just not going to be in the program. And so when a team gets as good as Bama is and as Georgia has been late, if you don't absolutely love football, like it's hard to stay. So that box is already kind of checked if you're looking at kids from that program. Like, the kid from Alabama is going to eat, sleep, and breathe football. Yeah. Unless you're uber talented like Jalen Carter, because there are some questions about how much he does absolutely love football. But my point of all this is I think they're getting good information, and I think Howie is realizing what you do when you get players that have played in big games and won championships with millions of people watching from a winning organization. I think it does play a little bit of a factor. Not with every player, but I think it plays a factor in some of these guys that they're coming in and they're not wowed, and you have to remember the city that they're walking into.
I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot of Georgia reporters at Eagles games this year, because that's what I would do if I were that the Bulldogs play on Saturday. I would get to an Eagles game. Unfortunately, the Eagles don't play in Atlanta this year, but I would get to an Eagles game, and there's got to be some interest down there among the fans.
There's got to be. I mean, it's an insane amount of players. I mean, it really. I mean, it's almost like it's kind of almost like laughable. Like
it's getting almost absurd. Yeah.
Right. And then when the Swift trade happened, everybody was like, "Oh my god." So
even though he's from Philly,
even though he's from Philly, exactly. But there was like that thing as well. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think sometimes it falls. Obviously, you're not going to get every guy you want or whatever, and it falls that way. But I think you sometimes do get really good intel from certain programs.
Very good point. Well, with that, we'll wrap it up, James. You've been incredibly generous with your time, and we certainly follow your work on the NFL Network, and are really eager to see what you come up with. And thank you very much, and good luck out there.
Oh, thank you. I'm hoping to get into town. Yeah, hey, say hi. I'm hoping to get into town during training camp. Also, I'm starting to map out my spots right now.
About where I'll be headed. So that'd be great.
Yeah, all right. Looking forward to it, Les.
Take care.
Take it easy.
That will be it for this edition of Bowen on the Birds. We'll be back next week.